I would like to thank the speakers from our first introductory session. Jürgen, Nick, thanks a lot for setting the scene, providing the bigger picture in which we're currently operating. And then I would like to give the floor to the first speaker of our second session, Mr. Paul Horrocks, who is the head of private finance for sustainable development at the OECD. And while Jürgen and Nick already set the scene more globally, Paul will provide us with an introduction to the role of bond markets in mobilizing climate finance. So as we all know, the bonds have been around for a long time, but green bonds are a relatively new thing. So we will learn about that now. The role also which green bonds can play in the countries we're interested in to hear about today, so the Eastern Partnership countries and Kazakhstan. With this, I give the floor to Paul. Paul, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Can you all hear me and see my presentation? Lovely. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to speak on this because we're doing a lot of work. So I come from the Development Cooperation Directorate. I'm Paul Horrocks, leading the Private Finance for Sustainable Development team there. And I think your topic, the timing for this is impeccable because we're picking up a lot of work and a lot of feedback from the market around GSSS bonds. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of how we see the evolution, and hopefully it gives a bit of a context about what we're doing. Now, just to say that I work in the, as I said, in the Private Finance for Sustainable Development team. And so and at the OECD, the Development Cooperation Directorate works for the DAC, so the Development Assistance Committee, and we look at the world of ODA, so Official Development Assistance. And a lot of that Ukraine's ODA eligible, and a lot of the work that EBRD does, the EIB does in the Eastern Europe relates to a lot of the work that we're doing. So I think there's lots of synergies and linkages. If I can go to my first slide. So how has the market been evolving, and what are we talking about GSSS bonds? Well, we're talking about green, social, and sustainability bonds. So there's sort of three markets there, or three buckets, but we've linked them all together to get an overview of the market. And as you can see, it's been very much increasing in regards to the appetite from investors and issuers. So it's basically driven, though, by developed OECD advanced markets, the sort of purple there, as you can see. But what we're seeing is quite a lot of ODA eligible countries as well, with a small green showing an increasingly jump in terms of those numbers going up as we're going towards 2022. And we've also got a lot of the supranational issues. Who are they? Those are the likes of the World Bank, the EIB, and other supranational entities. Emerging markets, so that's non-ODA, and that will probably be some of the buckets of the regions that we're looking at today. So also showing quite a nice clip and increase there, but we're coming from a very low base. So but when we speak to the likes of PIMCO in our market consultations, they tell us that it's not a question of it's a question of supply. The demand is there, so they are very keen to sort of get access to this. And this is this whole transition that we see from actors and investors, pension holders that want to invest in the ESGs and move towards the SDGs, and GSSS bonds fit the bill. Why? Because they're long tenor, they're stable, and they report on the impact. And we'll talk a bit about sustainability linked bonds later on in this presentation. So the numbers of ODA eligible countries are increasing. So that means there's also a lot of interest in these markets where the SDG gaps are the biggest. And that's also a bit in Eastern Europe and the regions that we're talking a bit about today, with this big needs to move their economies and decarbonize. And that's where the green, social, and sustainability markets are key. So if I can go to my next slide. So how has the evolution been? I mean, again, when we look at this, we look at the overall figures. You've got developed markets up there in the corner. EM markets, which are showing a sort of transition to also to having a lot more social, and social is tougher to do than green. So we're also, when we look at the social, it's things like hospitals. It's also hospitals that are sort of climate compliant, student accommodation, but it's also agriculture and water. So there's a lot of linkages between the social and the green. The green is the biggest part of this market at the moment, but we're also seeing an interest in investors to move into these more difficult social sectors, and also on the sustainability linked bonds. The overall growth of sustainability linked bonds, as you can see, is quite significant on the right hand side there, that they've gone to 20% of the market and shot up quite considerably between 2020 and 21. So that's the big growth, is these sustainability linked bonds, and those don't those are corporates, so they're not an underlying asset or pool of assets. So it's not taking a lots of students accommodation mixed with hospitals. It's the corporate, say I'm in Moldova, and I'm going to do I'm a corporate and I just need bond financing, and I'm doing some sustainability linked activities, and then I'm going to map my financing towards those activities. And if I don't deliver on those as a corporate, then I pay high interest rates. If I do deliver on those, then there's financial benefits to me. So there's the incentive for the corporates when they issue these to comply with what they say on the packaging in regards to their performance. So you can see the market shifting towards SLBs, and we're getting a bit more social, but it's still predominantly very much a green focus. And that's also a bit where we've seen the greenium, which is this pricing benefit from issuing green bonds compared to traditional, exactly the same, but because there's so much demand from investors that you get a benefit as an issuer in terms of how much you pay for your bond. This is a bit of the overview of the market. Now, we've looked a bit at developing countries. As you can see, that it's evolving, both in terms of numbers, but also in terms of size of amounts issued. And it's a very diverse group, so very good for investors to get a sort of nice portfolio of different activities. And we haven't mapped this work because we've been working with the government of Luxembourg on this, and their data from their stock exchange has been predominantly focused on these particular regions that we've compiled. The other work we've done is we've done some work for the Italian G20 presidency, and we did a stock take report on GSSS bonds, which also showed a lot of this. And we're doing some work for donors about how to help be issuers, so sovereign and corporate issuers. So sovereigns, when we talk about sovereigns, we're talking about sub-sovereigns, so municipal. We're also talking about state-owned entities or enterprises. So that's got a greater than 50% share of the state. Those are some of the sort of areas probably in this area where we're going to see a bit more of a need regarding the sort of a lot of state-owned activities that do need to get access to be able to decarbonize and move to that green transition. So I think important to sort of see the evolution and the massive changes we're seeing across the world, not only in your particular region. This shows the sort of sovereign amounts that and you can see that there's a really big demand for the SDGs. And it's, as you would expect, to be a bit in the sustainable factors at the top, clean energy, climate action, and those are also linking up with corporates. So corporates are wanting to get into this, and they're increasingly issuing around SDG activities, in particular 11 and 7. What we'd like to see is, of course, a bit more of these other SDGs getting access and being able to make the most. But you can see that the SDGs, that they do create an investable opportunity, and that we are getting an increasing share of financial sector, but also corporates in particular in the climate space. My next slide. So what are the challenges in this market? How are we seeing it evolve? Well, I mean, there's very much the sort of issues that we've seen. I mean, for Ukraine, it's going to be difficult when it comes out of this conflict that it can access financing. You need to have a sort of yields to, at least from the sovereign, to be able to fund your debt. So it will be critical that we get some of the donors, the supranationals, getting in and providing instruments like guarantees and being able to help with their financing needs. But it will be challenging initially, but there's a lot that the donor community can do, and actors like the EU in supporting that, because there is this demand. So if you're in between this sort of humongous amount that wants to get access to the SDGs, and we suspect that when Ukraine and other regions come back and want to access this funding, that it'll be a green recovery, and there'll be a lot of sort of green initiatives and programs. But what are the challenges? I mean, there's a weak macro fundamentals. You need a sort of a domestic capital market that's got a certain amount of liquidity to attract investors. You also need the credit rating agencies, and having complex budgeting process also hinders that. And you need a pipeline of projects to attract investors. And then just sort of moving around, you've got to think a bit about international standards. There's a fair amount out there that's been done by ICMA, and ESG investments can sometimes be create incentives for SDG washing. So there's also the need for these types of discussions to sort of bring out and understand and educate and discuss, including with international investors that might not know the opportunity. And there's this whole issue around real and perceived risk, which blended finance, where a lot of the work that we do can help. So what can donors do? Well, they can sort of support at the market infrastructure base. So thinking about standards, guidelines, and taxonomies. They can also provide support to second-party opinions. That's essential, because for this market to grow, you need to report on the impact. If I'm a big investor, I want to know what the impact of the green is, and that helps create the market. So having those systems, that eco infrastructure in place is critical to sort of building confidence and understanding of what exactly, if I'm in a sort of GSSS bond with underlying assets, what am I investing in, and how green are they, and how are they reporting on their green, and what they're supposed to be doing when I purchase the bond. You need to have technical assistance. That's critical. So if I'm a sovereign, I need to be able to issue, I need to be able to talk to investors, I need to have the ability to sort of put in the frameworks in place, and including at this level have regional approaches. If there's not enough pipeline, you need to work together on a regional basis to get critical. And we've seen that in a number of jurisdictions where countries have come together and had regional issuance of bonds. The donors can come together. So guarantees, which the EU with their external investment plan is very much focused on, are critical tools and can really improve the credit rating of the bond and improve therefore the pricing and liquidity amongst others. So those are really critical instruments that we've worked on in regards to blended finance. And then finally, you need to have anchor investors. So those that are sort of willing to put money into those projects, also into those bond issuance. And then finally, I would say that the sort of, again, having the ability to bring together investors, country issuers to build this understanding in markets are also critical. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this excellent, more global introduction to green bonds, sustainable bonds, social bonds. I love it that there is always something easy to remember, like the 4 I's. So I've noted that down. I think that's very good. It's very helpful. And I'm also very glad that we'll be addressing many of the 4 I's in our upcoming sessions. There already is a first question, but if it's okay, we will be keeping the questions for after all the speakers of the first session. But good you can obviously keep your hand up. So with this, I would already like to give the floor to our second speaker, Mr. Alexander Lehmann from the Frankfurt School of Finance, who has also been the team leader for the OECD Euro for Environment project, which was already mentioned by Christoph when he was walking us through the agenda. The big analysis and report which has been done on green bonds in the Eastern Partner countries in Kazakhstan. So now from the more global perspective provided by Paul, we will dive into our region. And with this, I would like to give Alex the floor. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Michaela. Pleasure to be here. And indeed, this has been a long project and needless to say, with rapidly changing context and market interest in the region. So if you can now see my slides, I should preface this by saying we covered the 7 countries, so these are the 6 Eastern Partnership countries and Kazakhstan, entirely through virtual meetings for obvious reasons between August and December last year. And really grateful for the local interest and engagement we encountered, not just with the public sector, but also with private and IFI stakeholders. So this work done through our local experts and with the author team of the summary report, which Christoph mentioned, led to the 7 country reports and the condensation of that you found in the summary report, which we circulated yesterday. And really from the outset, it was clear we needed to look at the capital market context, but also at the investment environment for renewables in particular and mitigation related investments. And from that, sort of explain the potential for sustainability linked debt capital market instruments, in particular, of course, green bonds. You will find in the report detailed analysis, which my colleague Georg Sachmann and his team in Berlin Economics prepared on the investment requirements in the region. And I will not go into this here and just focus on the green bond aspects, but maybe just say the energy systems remain vastly outdated, and the policy support for the net zero transition, the low carbon transition in energy systems in particular, is there in several countries. But these are among the most carbon intensive emerging and frontier markets anywhere, with a long history of misaligned incentives in energy systems. This expresses itself in a high carbon intensity of industry energy systems and the private sector more broadly. The team, my colleagues, prepared detailed estimates for a number of sectors, which you find in the paper. The headline number maybe to throw out here at this point would be over 110 billion needed mitigation related investments that could be potentially relevant for private sector finance. Yeah, so We explained a bit how we narrowed this down in the 5 sectors of buildings, public and private, energy systems, industry, and transport, and looked at potential investment needs. That's the, as it were, the ask. And now let me focus on the green bonds, and really the presentation from Paul Horrocks is hugely helpful in this context, because as he said, there is tremendous interest on the investor side in sustainability-linked instruments in emerging and frontier markets. Now, that being said, the actual use of the instrument in the 7 markets we examined has been much less than in other emerging market regions. In a nutshell, there have been 8 bonds so far. And I will not take you through the detail of every one of them, but maybe just group them on 2 slides in 2 sets of issues. And there were 4 internationally issued bonds by 2 Georgian companies and 2 Ukrainian companies. I think the connecting theme here is that these were large corporates with an established bond market, international bond market presence. The largest Ukrainian renewables company, the state electricity utility, and then the Georgian railways companies, and we look forward to the comments by Levan Iobashvili in a moment, and Georgia Global Utilities, which is owned by a large holding there, and in essence is private, but Ukreenergo and Georgian Railways, of course, state-owned enterprises. And Ukreenergo in that instance also benefiting from a state guarantee. So what's the common picture here? Well, these were large companies with an established bond market presence, with a credit rating. They accessed partly established investor base, but also significantly widened the investor base. So really the benefit of the green bond format for them was that they accessed new investors, and I think the empirical literature on green bonds certainly substantiates that these investors are less prone to flight, to liquidity crises, and that of course would ease any refinancing. Nevertheless, in 3 out of these 4 cases, the IFIs played the role of anchor investors, so committing to a certain share of the investment upfront, and that seemed to be needed in each of these instances. With the exception of the Ukrainian renewables company, which ran into its own problems subsequently, given that the local renewables tariff regime changed subsequent to that issue. Yeah. The Ukrainian situation, my colleague Stan Dubko will review tomorrow, I believe. And I think each one of these holds a little story. Except the sample that we're talking about really is somewhat limited. Yeah? Now, when we talk about bond market development, what we mean really is issuance on local markets and typically in local currency. Now, of those, there have been another 4, possibly 5 issues. 2 by Ameriabank in Armenia, the bank, the largest bank in the country, with an established green loan portfolio. So I think that's instructive, because the initial issuance was supported by the Dutch Development Agency, and then the subsequent issue earlier this year was listed on the local exchange. And I think this holds a number of very useful lessons, how banks can, as it were, be a stepping stone towards a green capital market development. So I look forward to that presentation in just a moment, in fact. Now, Kazakhstan is interesting for other reasons. The international exchange has a very high quality green bond, green finance framework, and a small green bond was listed there in 2020. And then the main exchange in Almaty saw 2 green bonds issued by the ADB, and both on the same day, and basically being one transaction for different underlying projects. So I think this underlines the limitation as yet in local markets, and also the need to flesh out the green finance framework. Though that being said, the Armenian transaction emerged basically ahead of a local green finance framework, such as through a taxonomy or ESG disclosure rules. Now, I think in parallel, we've seen countries upgrade their green finance regulations. I think Georgia in many ways stands out here. Again, we'll have a presentation on this by the colleague from the National Bank. So I think as in other countries, a roadmap document sort of previews the intentions of the regulator. And then that was fleshed out through ESG disclosure rules. A very interesting actual first stock take then was published in 21 with things like green asset ratios. A taxonomy is being implemented, and the banks and asset managers also implement risk management tools, in conjunction with that disclosure requirement. As I said, in Kazakhstan, the international exchange has a very fully fleshed out green finance framework, albeit not really the issuance and trading that backs that up. Whereas in the main exchange, this is still under preparation. Ukraine, as I said, my colleague will explain that later on in our conference. Again, there is a roadmap that underlines the importance of green finance, yet the significance of green bonds was only then recognized in the capital market regulation last year. And the state issuance, was meant to connect to that green finance option. Now, I think we need to be realistic with the obstacles. I think the previous presentation usefully gave you many dimensions of those obstacles. Let me focus on just 3 here. First is that clearly we're dealing with severely underdeveloped let me just focus on the investment environment first. Really, throughout our discussions in the 7 countries, we saw a concern over lack of projects that could be of the quality required for bond market finance. So that would in particular relate to the corporate governance, the transparency, the disclosure that allows investors to track allocation of proceeds and impact. Now, I would argue that poor corporate governance, as we find throughout the region, is a key obstacle, specifically for green bonds that offer that greater transparency. Yeah. But more fundamentally, I think there is concern over the investment environment for renewables. Feed-in tariffs are revised in instances post hoc. The government does not live up to its obligations to the renewable companies, and of course the state-owned utilities benefit from numerous subsidies and tax incentives in the use of fossil fuels. That being said, throughout the region, with I think the notable exception of Belarus and Azerbaijan, we found a significant interest from local investors in renewable projects. I think the key issue for green bonds is that these projects need to be not just of a sufficient size, or need to be aggregated into a portfolio that lends itself for bond finance. They also need to be sufficiently advanced to allow bond investors to have that exposure. So I think the Ukrainian transactions are illustrative of the problem that the green finance, the green bond typically and often is a refinancing transaction of projects that are already at or near the operational stage. Yeah. Now, the second more fundamental problem is the underdevelopment of local bond markets. That was also mentioned. I think the region is highly bank-based, and the bond market development is quite recent. I think there was an interesting publication by Climate Bonds Initiative on the ASEAN markets this week. I think that underlines how near 20 years of bond market development has now fostered that larger interest in local currency, local green bonds. So that's a separate, I think, investor base that can be accessed there, and with a probably more limited exposure by European institutional investors. In the paper, you find a bit of explanation of the sort of these summary charts that give you a bit of a impression that, you know, banking development has been steady, again with the notable exception of Belarus and Azerbaijan, with highly state-based banking systems. You know, comparing this to, you know, broad measures of access to bank credit here in the euro area, this is, you know, converging at least. Whereas we haven't really seen that bond market development in the 7 countries. Looking in more detail, these are indicators from the IMF for financial market depth, access, and efficiency or turnover. This is, I think, present really only in Kazakhstan, and nevertheless, you know, some promising developments in Ukraine and Georgia, with a growing share of local currency bond issues. Yeah. Now, finally, I think the green finance regulation is an obstacle, albeit not the primary one. I think what we've seen in some countries, also Armenia, as I mentioned, is the need to develop, you know, to have incentives for bank asset generation and the sustainable asset space. And these loan portfolios could lend themselves for subsequent bond market refinancing. Now, to conclude, the policy options are on the supply, on the demand side, on the sort of wider ecosystem. I think sovereign and agency and state enterprise issues could be a lead in developing the green bond market. Banks provide the underlying culture, if you will, of green asset finance, and could be issuers in their own right. I think in the immediate instance, the context and the capital market withdrawal from the region will, I think, steer us towards international issuance more than local issuance, and the sustainability-linked instruments have the potential really to steer around that need for green and taxonomy-aligned projects, and define targets for corporate issuers that can credibly do so. And I think the role of IFIs in both international and local issues will remain key as catalyst anchor investors. To conclude, I think the green finance environment is under preparation and being developed. I think the central banks, the regulators have a key role to play. However, I think the investment environment, the need for renewable companies issuing at scale and high quality projects being financed, that is the defining agenda. And I think that's what authorities and corporates need to focus on. Okay, thank you. And I look forward to the further discussion.
Michaela, you may be muted.
Yes, I am. I think now you can hear me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alexander, for outlining what is happening in Eastern partner countries in Kazakhstan by giving concrete examples, which indeed we will have a closer look at quite shortly and also tomorrow, but by also referring to the challenges which are particularly applicable to Eastern partner countries in Kazakhstan, which obviously are very similar to what was outlined also by Paul beforehand. Before we go indeed to the concrete experience of our colleagues in Armenia and Georgia, I think it's good if we do a bit of interaction here. There were a couple of questions in the chat, and there is then also Harald Hirschhofer's question. So let me first quickly respond already to something in the chat, and I would also ask the two speakers who we've had to already look at the questions in the chat as well. There were two questions quite similar in terms of what is the EU or OECD doing to support partner countries with bond issuance. I can tell you that we will hear actually more about this tomorrow when Lisa Klinger will be speaking about support from the EU side when it comes to the Global Green Bond Initiative. This is part of the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, and she will be outlining what we're doing from the EU side. So just already, it's a bit like a cliffhanger with like Netflix movies or series. You need to stay put till tomorrow to hear more about this. She will be the expert on this. But obviously, I do not want to stop my colleagues from the OECD to outline a bit more here. So I'll give colleagues who've been speaking 2 more seconds to think. And in the meantime, I give Harald Hirschhofer the floor for his question.
Michaela, thank you very much. It's part a comment and part a question, because the OECD just published a few days ago the OECD debt report. In chapter 2, there is also mentioned that, as part of the ESG requirements, that currency risk is of course a big risk. So if we look at the current situation, there are 3 factors which make currency risk quite important. First of all, the ongoing crisis, COVID-related as well as in the Ukraine, has pointed that the debt sustainability in these countries as an asset class in the low-income countries, but also in the countries of the region we are discussing in this conference, is of course becoming more precarious. So there is a contagion risk increasing. The second point is that many of low-income countries are less diversified, both from a GDP perspective as well as from a trade perspective. And that makes swings in the currency relatively large, and we expect them to become larger even. So if we put this together, we made with the IMF a few months ago a survey among debt managers and sovereign debt managers to about 100 countries. And the findings were pretty clear, which showed that most debt managers and sovereign treasuries do not have sufficient capacities to A, quantify currency risks, and B, manage them. And that has, of course, severe implication in the whole debt governance on the side of the issuers. And this is clearly an ESG, more G issue. So one of the challenges, and comes my questions, goes to Alexander, but also to Paul, is what can we do now to address this situation? One is, of course, training and capacity building, and that will take time. Particularly given the fact that, I want to make a quick comment to what Alexander said about the need to develop the national markets. Yeah, we need to go into national markets. It's ideal to have national currency markets and bond markets. However, most of these issuance is not bought by domestic savings. It all comes through portfolio inflows. And these portfolio inflows are the first to revert. And you have more increase in the macro instability because of that. So the alternative really right now, which seems to be much more viable, is to have US dollar or euro denominated green bonds. But that opens up a currency risk mismatch on the part of the issuer. So we are working with the European Commission to address that TCX. So I'm talking for TCX, we're a currency hedging facility to create two markets in currency risk. But how do you see this from particular for this region, which we want to focus in this conference? How do you see this challenge going forward? Do these treasuries there, in your understanding, have enough capacities to manage currency risks? How deep are the markets? How do you depend on US dollar, euro funding, and how do we address the currency risk? So that's my question. Sorry, it's a very long question, Michaela.
It's also a complicated question. So I'm happy I'm not in the shoes of Alexander and Paul, who will have to respond to this quite complex question, which is obviously a very, let's say, timely question in the current situation. So Paul, you were nodding in between, so I will just give you the floor. I have the feeling you have some responses, and then to Alexander. And there has also been in the meantime some more questions in the chat, which might maybe go more for Alexander from colleagues in Ukraine, more concretely on different sectors where green bonds could be issued. So Paul, please.
Thanks, Michaela. And I mean, and good to see Harold and on this call and in this discussion. I'm not gonna, I mean, Alexander's got the capacity to speak specifically about this region and this sort of FX challenges. I mean, what we do, from the OECD perspective, I'll just go to the FX issue that Harold raises first. I mean, donors can help build up that capacity in treasuries at the supra level. But there is, of course, a challenge around the currency, and that's, I mean, the greenium that I spoke about, that's, you typically see that in euros and dollars. So that sort of pricing benefit. The big liquid markets are in dollars, so that's where you'll get the sort of the greenium benefit, and that also and euros. So it is a challenge to sort of transition, and at the same time you want to attract international investors, but if it's not linked, particularly if you're a sovereign issuer, with your local currency, then there's this critical mismatch, and that creates problems. But I mean, there are options out there like TCX that you can sort of hedge. That might limit the sort of investor base, the depth and liquidity that you can attract, but ultimately you want to help build capital markets, which is where donors can come in and support that local capital markets through technical assistance, through hedging, through TCX, through better through anchor investments as well, but I suspect that, I mean, I'll let Alexander talk about this particular region, but I mean, initially, you know, for example, in the context of Ukraine, you're going to need a lot of capital. It's probably going to need to be hard currency. So you want to attract international investors. And then only subsequently will you be able to sort of build up the local financing at a sovereign level and the local investors that can potentially come in, or at least you could attract some investors in local currency. So there's a variety of things that donors can do. What the OECD is doing in this whole respect is having this discussion, bringing together actors, solving these problems, looking at, I mean, from our perspective, we're providing data, transparency, looking at benchmarks, showing what can happen, showing what donors can do. So in terms of the policy gaps that we can identify and how those can be solved, but also shedding highlight on the humongous opportunities that are present here for investors that want to get access for their investors to these types of projects and regions. So peer reviews, data, transparency, identifying policy gaps. The great report that Alexander did that sheds light on this particular region and how we collectively as the sort of community on this and donors included. And I mean, Sean Kidney is of course on this in this workshop. You know, I'm sure will bring a nice perspective on how he sees things. But yeah, so that's a bit about I think what we need to do and help these regions transition to net zero, because there is an opportunity here, but it's just sort of filling those gaps and bringing together these types of discussions. Thanks.
Alexander, your name was mentioned repeatedly. So
yeah, thank you for you know, giving us a curveball, as they say. So just briefly, not much to add. The region, of course, suffers from a long-standing problem of dollarization in both banking and capital market finance. You know, some countries have had more credible inflation targeting macro policies than others and have gradually reduced that. Georgia, to some extent, Armenia come to mind, and this is also backed up by, I think, the sovereign issuance debt management side that I think have that capacity for currency risk management that you alluded to. And which you know, target the local currency debt market in their debt strategies also. So I think in times such as now, general risk aversion results in reversals of that de-dollarization, and local currency instruments become more demanding. If you look at some of the local markets, the local currency issues are highly illiquid. They're essentially bilateral placements, you know, substituting for lending essentially. I would say we are right to be concerned about further currency risk. But I think the larger issuers who go into, say, a green bond issue in the European market ought to be able to access hedging that you know, reaps the benefit of capital market access while sheltering to some extent from the currency risk. Yeah. Now TCX has done stellar work in the region. And that may require the involvement of IFIs to guarantee some of that risk. But EBRD may speak to that in more depth later on in the proceedings. Yeah. Okay.
Alexander, would you want to answer maybe some of the questions in the chat as well from Oksana on municipal bond markets in Ukraine? And which sectors would be attractive for green bonds-based buildings renewables? Also, very difficult question, how to bundle adaptation and mitigation. Indeed, adaptation measures are not so attractive. And then there was also a question related to the EU taxonomy, since you were talking about the regulatory framework beforehand. Maybe
Yeah.
we can tackle
Okay.
the
I need to.
question.
I need to skip the first one, and I would ask Stan Dubko to comment on that in his. Or do you want to come in briefly now, Stan? Can you say something? If I may pass.
Yes, you're
I'd
allowed.
like to address this to Stan. Municipal issues.
Yes, I can say a few words. Hi, everyone. My name is Stanislav Dubko, and I participated in the preparation of the summary report, but also covering Ukraine in particular. So I will also refer to the short presentation I will have tomorrow, and I will touch upon this issue as well. But for now, I can say a few words. We have, of course, analyzed municipal market for green bonds in Ukraine, especially that given that Ukraine has a history of successful issuance by cities, especially in the period from 2004 until 2009 maybe, and over 30 Ukrainian municipalities have quite successfully issued and repaid the bonds, but we are talking about plain vanilla bonds. And of course, the investment needs and the potential to do projects on the municipal level is quite significant and has always been in Ukraine. But there are obvious problems also of not being able, in many cases, municipalities have not been able to come up with a pipeline of projects that could be financed through bonds, and creation of pipeline of projects is a problem that Ukraine will have to deal with. But I will tell a bit more what particular sectors could be of interest in Ukraine, in the municipal sector as well. So let me probably stop here.
I like this. Another cliffhanger, so you need to stay put for Stan's discussion later on. On EU taxonomy, Alexander, did you want to say?
No, that's a tough one. Now, as I think we will discuss later on, the EU Green Bond Standard and the mandatory taxonomy alignment are coming our way. I think. Yeah, so for our region here, I don't think this is immediately defining. I think the bond issues we have seen all had, independent verification in the taxonomy alignment of the essentially, I think, the climate bonds or other accepted taxonomy that was then, defined the green bond framework of the issuer. But I think EU investors will be more demanding in emerging market green bond quality, not necessarily requiring a full taxonomy alignment, and the taxonomy is only partially complete, as you know. But I think options of greenwashing will gradually narrow down, and I think we've seen variable quality in the definition of sustainability, and I think the required quality to appeal to a large European investor will gradually increase. Yeah. And now NFRD is the EU Directive on Disclosure. Again, that is now superseded by broader disclosure requirements, CSRD. And again, I don't think, even though, 3 countries had technically an obligation to be aligned with EU directives and regulations, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. I think good disclosure can be defined in the context of local regulation. Yeah.
Thank you. Good. With this, we close this little Q&A, and we move to the very hands-on presentations, I hope, of our colleagues from Armenia and Georgia, and we will be talking about the issues perspectives. So I'm very happy that we have with us today Mr. Sargsyan, the head of Financial Institutions Division from Ameriabank. Alexander was already referring to the 2 issuances by Ameriabank. And we look forward to hear your experience, how you prepared it, how you structured the green bonds, and also about the benefits, of course, because the purpose of this meeting today and tomorrow is as well to incite other institutions to issue green bonds. So, Mr. Sargsyan, the floor is yours. Happy to have you with us.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can I ask Jonathan to share the presentation?
Yes, 1 moment.
This would be the moment to tell a joke about green bonds, but I don't know one. I don't know, are there jokes about green bonds, or are they still too new to have jokes?
You can't joke about green bonds. It's an outrage.
All right. Here we go. Saved by the presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, this is the iconic building, our headquarters, which we built in 2013, which is the first BREEAM certified green office building in the heart of capital Yerevan, financed by RFC and DEG almost 10 years ago. So I'll go in short about our green bond placements 2 years ago and this year. So next slide, please. Well, Ameriabank, very much in brief, is the leading bank in Armenia, is the first in the market by all key financial indicators for almost a decade. This is an innovator and trendsetter in the local market. We enjoy the best practice in corporate governance, an exemplary board composition. We do have EBRD and Asian Development Bank as part of our shareholder structure since 2015 and 18. It's a unique culture, professional and experienced management team, and we are honored with high-ranking international awards, such as from the banker at Euromoney and everyone. Next slide. We are enjoying the highest possible credit ratings from S&P and Moody's, with country ceiling at BB- from S&P and Ba3 from Moody's. As I said, we are #1 in terms of assets, liabilities, net profit, equity, and loans. And we are a team of 1,200 already. And this figure is always a very dynamic figure, because at the time I mentioned the figure, it goes, I might be wrong by 15, 20 people, because we are growing pretty fast. Next slide. Yeah, and about the green bond framework, which we developed together with our international partners, namely FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, some 2 years ago, and did it together with Ernst & Young, which indeed played a critical role in setting up a foundation for our leap into green business and green bond business in particular. I mean, needless to mention, we have been active in green financing for the past 10, 12 years, and having done more than 125 million USD funding through various DFIs. We have got any sort of development mandate in our part of the world. And as our debut issuance in 2020, as I said, was together with FMO, which was a sizable placement in the local content. It was $15 million equivalent in euro, and a logical and a reasonable step forward was a placement in the local market. Yeah, I forgot to mention the first placement was private, which we did together with FMO, then was listed in the local stock exchange. But the recent placement, which we did this year in first quarter, was USD 8 million, and most importantly, A&D 3 billion in February 2022. I mean, we talked about local currency and TCX playing a key role in currency hedging in developing markets. And this is a milestone event placing the local bonds, green bonds, by referring to the green bond framework, which is in compliance with the green bond principles and international capital markets associations rules and guidelines. We abide all these 4 SDGs, as you may see, the 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th. We had been very cautious by choosing these 4. We could have probably picked 1 or 2 more, but we chose these 4 to be super confident, because all of our actions and practices have been in this in all of these domains. Yeah. Next slide, please. Here you may see the eligible green assets categories, renewable energy being the most, so to say, active area to place, and also we are active in energy and resource efficiency in industry. Next slide, please. And I've been asked to talk about the benefits from green bond issuances and as well as challenges. So here you may see all the benefits from our green bond journey. It obviously is an opportunity to raise capital, because the green bonds have been proved attractive to growing number of institutional investors with an appetite in sustainable investment alternatives. This market has been growing significantly for the past years and the decade. So I certainly encourage and advise all of our peers to go for this. It's an interesting journey. It's a different level. It's an interesting, reasonable graduation from green business that you are used to do. It's about investor-based diversification as well as new league of investors. It's a green bond project being a new level and an important milestone with boosting effect on the transformation to more responsible and sustainable financing. It obviously is about enhanced knowledge in-house in sustainable finance, support to build expertise again in-house. Yeah, which is an important element talking about green financing. I mean, I remember the first discussions we were having internally, despite the fact that having done a large, probably the largest green financing in the local market. It wasn't easy to grasp all these jargons and elements and the jokes about green bonds at that time. So I'm very happy we managed to embrace this idea from top down and bottom up within our team, which works well, and which is the foundation for our success in green bond placement. Next slide, please. As well as talking about challenges, as I said, alignment of our existing green business with green bond principles was the key challenge. The new jargon, terminology, new approach, etc., and identifying use of proceeds and eligibility criteria was another challenge at that time. Now this is a little bit old slide actually, which I've put from previous presentations. Now looking back, it wasn't a challenge at all, because we just had to pick up the core pillars and build up on our experience in green lending. So impact reporting, I would say, has been a challenge, but which is in past again, because we have just issued our impact report, being verified by one of the top reputable names in the market, Sustainalytics. And yeah, translating the practices into Armenian bond market rules and principles was yet another challenge, which we did successfully with our in-house team. Yeah, next slide, please. And about, I spoke about green bond report, our annual report, which we just released. I mean, talking about green bonds, transparency, integrity comes first, and we took this with very much of understanding and hired the best second-party providers to validate all what has been done in-house, internally, to make sure we are aligned to all best practice international standards about green bond principles in particular. These are the high-level figures what where we did business and where the funds were being allocated. So 31% went to solar stations, 18% to SME solar and solar leasing. We talk about individuals and SMEs installing solar panels and renewable energy practices. But largely, as you may see from the figures, 50% went for small hydropower plant projects. Next slide, please. As you may see, as a result, 145 new jobs have been created. Worth mentioning that 70% of the funds were used for refinancing purposes, and only 30% went for new projects, which was acceptable by the bondholders. And so, I mean, the figures about green energy produced and CO2 emissions cuts are here. Yeah, this is pretty much I prepared for this session. I hope you find it useful. Any questions, just let me know.
Thank you very much, Ara, for this very hands-on presentation. Oh, I see the first questions that already come in. We will take our second concrete example, and then we will respond to all the questions. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Levan Iobashvili, the head of the economic department of Georgia Railway. The floor is yours. There you are. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you. First question, do you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to be here on this seminar, and I'm honored to represent Georgian Railway. Before I go to the green bond specifically and the challenges that we had during the transaction, first I want to introduce my company to you, dear colleagues. So basically this October we will be celebrating a 150 year of establishment of Georgian Railway. We are one of the oldest company in Georgia and only railway transportation provider. We are a vertically integrated company. We own our infrastructure as well as our freight cars, freight rail cars and locomotives, etc. We also provide freight transportation services as well as passenger transportation services throughout the country. Basically, we are one of the largest employers in our country with more than 12,000 employees with annual salary fund of around 200 million Georgian laris, and we pay annually more than 47 million laris in state budget. So before the transaction actually happened, and I mean the refinancing project that I will talk later, we always positioned ourselves to be the green green mode of transportation, because we use mainly electric rail cars, not mainly, but only electric rail cars for transportation of freight and the passengers. So, and also we own those rail cars, and our network is nearly 100% electrified. Basically, we also monitor the environmental issues within the company. Actually, we have department, ESG department, which monitors this process, and we are fully compliant with acceptable applicable environmental protection laws within the country. So basically, now for transaction, in 2012, we issued the Eurobonds to finance the modernization project, which is mainly directed in the Gorge section of the country and is directed to modernize the railway system within it. So the 2012 500 million Eurobonds were issued to finance this and other eligible projects. And basically, what we are hoping is to increase average train speed, to decrease the transportation time, and increase efficiency of the company overall. So this is worth to mention that this railway line, which we modernize, will be also 100% electrified. So basically, when we started in 2020 to 19 and 20, when we started to thinking about refinancing of 2012 Eurobonds, we never considered the green bond as an sort of financing instrument, but we only considered one strategy, is to refinance it, and maybe using some anchor investors to attract more of investors as well. So in 2021, in February, when we started negotiating with the IFIs to be our anchor investors, one of the IFIs suggested that, well, we made some presentation about our company. We made presentation on what our funds will be used. And IFI suggested, why don't you make this, well, it seems eligible, it seems green for me, and why don't you make this transaction green? So when we started to thinking about it, we found out that green financing is quite profitable for us, because many investors are interested in this, and well, we started negotiating with our investment banks, and they said, okay, let's do it. So we started to working on our framework, and basically this was our first major challenge to work on the framework, because we had to first find out what the green financing was, what standards and procedures we have to comply. And well, basically it was our main challenge during this period. We made sure that constructing the framework would be 100% in line with the taxonomy and the principles. We made sure that every single sentence would be in compliance with them, and so basically it took us some time, it took us some resources, and it's worth to mention that it was during the pandemic period when we worked out of the office, and well, basically this was quite challenging experience for us. Fortunately, we managed to finalize the framework on time. And we got secondary party opinion from S&P Global Ratings. So we were quite happy that our framework was in line with all the major principles and the commitments that we took from the framework were aligned with the taxonomy principles. So basically, now our second major challenge is reporting that we have to do because of the issue of the new green bonds. And basically, we are in preparation to issue our first impact and allocation report. And we also contacted the assurance company agency to make the assurance for it. So basically, yes, this is our major challenges, but our main success issuing the green bond was this number, 4%. So basically, when we at the issuance date, the demand for our bond was 8 times of the supply. So we managed to decrease our coupon rate by around 4%, and so we made annually $20 million decrease of our interest payments. So basically, as Mr. Lehmann mentioned, yes, it allowed us to attract more investors who were interested in ESG financing, and allowed us to decrease our coupon payments. That was all I wanted to talk today. Please, if you have questions, please.
Thank you very much, Levan, for this very interesting presentation. In this case, I can at least say I have taken the train from Tbilisi to Batumi, and it's a very comfortable ride and much more punctual than German trains. But this is not the subject here today. Now the floor is open for questions. I saw Ara already responded to the one in the chat. If there are questions from the audience, it would be nice if people would just speak up. It's more interactive if you tell us your question than if you put it in the chat. And here we have Sean with the first question. The floor is yours.
Can I say what an exciting story that is from Georgian Rail, and the result is so good. But the question simply is, are you looking at doing everything going forward green, all issuance? Have you considered programmatic issuance, which would mean that your whole asset base would be certified, and then any kind of bonds, debt, instrument, short-term paper could qualify as well as part of selling your story?
So basically, thank you for the question. When we issued this loan, that we understand that some of our we made due diligence to our company which projects can be eligible to the green financing, and basically we found out that we have majority of our projects that is directed to transportation, sort of electrified transportation is basically eligible. But on the other hand, yes, we may consider to finance, well, basically issuing a green bond made us tell the investors that we not only say that we are green sort of transport, here is the bond and here is the SPO to prove it. So yes.
A key point I have to add, you can issue bonds and debt and so on against existing qualifying assets, not just new project for everyone on the page. So when a rail company does something, they can finance new projects, but they can also refinance existing qualifying stock, which increases your potential asset pool and allows rollovers. The market is absolutely 100% comfortable with that.
We have to comply on some covenants to our new bond. Basically, if the covenant allows us to issue additional for liquidity covenant allows us to issue additional financing, then yeah, sure, why not? But yeah, the covenants are pretty serious. So.
Very good. Thank you very much for the question. Any other questions from the floor to our two speakers? Yeah. Oh, it's a physical hand. Stan.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to raise a virtual hand. I couldn't find the button, so physical hand, yes. Thank you, Ara, for already answering my question about your internal procedure for recognizing green loans. Just to clarify further a little bit, my question was more about, do you do this recognition of green loans only for the purpose of having sufficient number of underlying assets for green bonds, or do you in general try to create as big as possible green loan portfolio within overall portfolio of your bank and report this green portfolio regardless of green bonds?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, the team is qualified and, as I said, trained to run this operation within our risk management center. And as our green bond framework goes, it's the role of eligibility experts to tag all the assets which are green. Well, as I said, we have successfully managed more than 200 million USD funds from different IFIs previously in the form of a loan, and the team is experienced to identify and tag all these assets as green. But going forward, we do have a green lending strategy, which assumes increasing the share of green assets within our loan portfolio. And we expect these assets to be financed by various green instruments, be that loan or a bond. Bond looks and sounds more appropriate instrument in this respect. So yeah, I mean, for the time being, as you could see from the slides, we had reported larger dollar amount of portfolio than the placements were, meaning we do have currently a larger portfolio of green assets than the bond proceeds are.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if I've answered your question, but
yeah, I mean, it's not exactly off topic, but it's a kind of continuation. If you do assess green assets for green bond purposes, then logically you may develop overall green lending strategy just to create more green assets on your books. But yeah, I think you've answered my question very well. Thank you very much.
Great. Any other virtual or physical hands being raised? Yes, Nelly, it is a virtual hand. Go ahead.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Nelly Petkova and I work at the OECD team organizing this meeting and the discussion. And I just wanted to have a quick question to Ara and also related to what Stanislav was saying. When it comes to assessing the quality of the underlying assets, I was wondering, you said that your teams working on green lending and the green bond proceeds allocation, they are trained. But I was wondering, apart from financiers, do you have really engineers who would understand technologies, who would know the market for these technologies? Do you have people like this, or you rely more on people who have been trained over the years working on your green lending products? And if not, is there a possibility to consider such an option? Because I think I've heard about a few banks in the region who have green lending products, who have hired as part of their permanent teams in the banks really engineers, and this seems to have helped them a lot and has increased the quality of their work and their products and their investments in the end of the day.
Thank you, Nelly. This is a really good question. And well, the risk management director is a mathematician himself. And all of, I can't, certainly they are not engineers, but I do agree the team is missing this tangible component. However, given the size of the portfolio and the experience we have built so far, and the consultants we hire from time to time, and the TA support we receive from our DFI partners from time to time, fills the gap, and we do not need to hire engineers, presumably expensive workforce to sustain this. To fill this part. But I do agree, yeah, going forward as we grow too, we might consider some technical skills as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a good point. Thanks.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with this we can close our second session.